Now, let me tell you, if I was Feyre in this world, I would be forcing a bow and arrow into my sister's hands and be like, you're coming with me, like, help me. Hi, welcome to this video. My name is Rhianna, and recently I read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. So firstly, why did I read this book, you may ask? And I read this book because I really enjoy fantasy books, but I don't tend to read a lot of fantasy and romance. And that's because I tend to prefer the fantasy aspects of a book rather than the romantic aspects of the book. But I recently read Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, an amazing fantasy Norse-inspired epic. And there is a tiny bit of romance in these books, more specifically with the character of Orca and Thorkel. They are married, and I enjoyed the romantic aspects of the story, and I thought maybe I should try more romantic fantasy and see what I think. I also have a few friends who love A Court of Thorns and Roses. A Court of Thorns and Roses is also immensely popular. It has nearly 2 million 5-star reviews on Goodreads, which is a lot of people. And I felt like I was missing out. As such a big reader, I thought I need to read at least the first book in the series to see what my opinion is on the series. So I've now done that. Firstly, before I continue, I will say that I can see the merits that this book has. I think what it did really well was the character of Feyre, although she made some kind of crazy decisions. I think her first person narrative really allowed you to see the world from her point of view, and it made me feel like I was Feyre in the story, and I love the immersion of that. I think what was also done well is the world is really interesting. I love a fairy world. I used to love the Iron Fey series by Julia Kagawa, and I really like the different courts, the spring court, the night court, the autumn court, all the different courts. But there were some issues that I had with this book, unfortunately, so I'm gonna talk about them in this video. Firstly, I want to go through the entire plot of this book because it's kind of wild. So we're introduced to Feyre, who is your typical young adult book female protagonist. She is living in poverty in this fantasy world, and she is a hunter in the woods, and she tries to find, rabbits, wolves, deer, to try and keep her family alive. Now, she has 2 sisters, but her sisters, hopeless. Now, let me tell you, if I was Feyre in this world, I would be forcing a bow and arrow into my sister's hands and be like, you're coming with me, like, help me. Anyway, one day Feyre is out in the woods and there is a wolf, and she kills the wolf. She skins it alive. Later, we realise that wolf was a real person, or a fairy person, who she skinned alive. And then Feyre goes to sell that wood pelt, and we meet this mercenary in this market who was really quite interesting, and she sort of spoon feeds some of world building to Feyre so we can understand more about the world. And I'll talk more about how the world was revealed to us later. And then Feyre goes back to her cottage, and then Tamlin turns up in the form of a beast. And I was really into it at this point. I really loved the inciting incident. I think Feyre's family home life was set up really well, so when there is a dramatic change, it just felt very exciting. Then Feyre goes to live in the fairy realm with Tamlin, the fairy, because she killed the wolf, and he's like, because you killed the fairy wolf, now you have to come with me to like replace him, kind of thing. And then it's really like the fun and games aspect of the book, where Feyre is exploring this new manor house that Tamlin has, and going out into the forest too, and nearly getting herself killed numerous times. Like, if I were Feyre in this situation, I would be hiding inside. I say reading books. Feyre can't read, so, but she can paint. I'd just be painting and hiding inside, not going to possibly get killed by some crazy fairies in the woods. And then Tamlin, Lucien, Feyre chat to each other a lot. The relationships between those 3 characters is built quite well. And then some other stuff goes down. With Tamlin, he has to go find a woman and mate with her for some reason. I forget why. And Feyre is told to like stay inside because like some fairy stuff is going down. And she's like, you know, I could stay inside, or I could not do that. And so she goes and she meets Rhysand. Now, I have to admit, I think Rhysand is probably the most interesting character in this book, just because there's layers to him, so you don't know if he's evil or if he's good. And I think the intrigue of that was quite captivating, and that made him an interesting character. And then, because it's not really safe for her anymore, Tamlin sends Feyre back to her home, and she realizes that Tamlin has allowed her family to not live in poverty anymore, and they're living quite well, which is nice for them. But then Feyre realises that Tamlin is in danger, and so she goes back to the Spring Court, where she meets like the maid that she has, and the maid tells her like this whole like fairy lore backstory about like a curse and an evil lady, and then Feyre goes to try and save Tamlin under the mountain where the evil lady is, and then just stuff gets wild. Like the lady could just kill Feyre, but she kind of wants to torture Tamlin because she wants him to like submit to her, and so she makes Feyre do these like really difficult tasks, which include killing a worm. Also, she says like you don't need to do these tasks if you like just solve this riddle. Now the riddle was really easy, like it was clear that the answer was love, but we have to take into account that Feyre can't read, so you know, she hasn't had the best education. And this part was quite exciting, but then near the end of all this shenanigans, the evil lady tells Feyre to kill 3 people. So she kills the first 2, feeling pretty guilty about it. I mean, she kills them, and then she has to kill Tamlin. But then she remembers in the back of her mind that he has a stone heart, and I quite liked how, as the reader, you could have picked up on that too, like if you were paying like great attention to the text, that Tamlin had a stone heart. And yeah, so he has a stone heart, so she stabs him, but he doesn't die. And then she lives because all the fairies come together and they turn her into a fae. And then she goes back, lives happily ever after with Tamlin, although I presume not, because I do know in the next book she decides to go to Rysand, which he's better for her. Tamlin, to be honest, is not that interesting. And that is the plot of A Court of Thorns and Roses. So now I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about different aspects of the book. The first aspect I want to talk about is the writing. Now, I've read a few different opinions online. Some people say that the writing is quite childish and simple and lacks depth. Other people say that the writing is beautiful and flowery and allowed them to really connect with the story. Now, in my opinion, I'm somewhere in the middle. The main issue with the writing is that the writer often tells us information rather than showing us that information. For example, Feyre loves painting, and there's a part in the book where she says, "I couldn't bring myself to paint." And that is straight to the point. It tells you very clearly that she's too sad, she can't paint. But in my opinion, maybe something just a little bit nicer would have been something like, "I picked up the paintbrush, I tried to form a stroke, it stalled, collapsed, turned into nothing." And in that, we are clearly getting a clear picture of what Feyre is doing, and you understand that she can't paint because she's sad, but you're not being told that she can't paint because she's sad, you're seeing it. And this doesn't happen like throughout the book. There are parts where the writer does show and not tell. But for me, I sometimes find myself feeling a bit disconnected with the story, and I think maybe it was because of the writing. Also, another part, we learn that, this is a bit of a spoiler, but we learn that Lucien had a lover and that her lover was killed. And the way that information is revealed to us is his father had her put down, executed in front of Lucien as his 2 elder brothers held him and made him watch. Now that is a very dramatic scene to imagine. However, the way it's presented to us is just very like, this is what happened. And I think to create a more visceral response from the reader, it could have been described in a lot more detail. Perhaps it could have been built up to the character describes the girl that he loved, and we're like, oh, where's this going? What happened to her? And then you can say, oh, then her neck was broken. And then you're like, oh my god, dramatic. But I just felt like the way the information was presented to us, it was just like, this is what happened. And I was like, oh, that's sad. But I think there are ways that you can make the reader feel like more emotionally connected to what you're writing about. Also, in relation to the writing, there was a part in the beginning where Feyre says, "At least I had my father's soft mouth." And I like was kind of taken aback by that a second, because I was like, she has her father's soft mouth. Sounds like she's like taken his lips off and hoards them. But what she really means is that she's inherited her father's features. She's inherited her father's mouth. But just the phrasing, a little bit weird. So another aspect of the book I want to talk about is the world building. So I really enjoy the world of the story, but I did feel at times we were really told the information. And again, I think it maybe just could have been revealed in a bit more of an interesting way. I recently read the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and I loved how she revealed the world by basically telling us nothing. So she reveals it very much through just things happening in the world. So for example, a character turns a dog into, or kind of dog, crazy dog, into stone. And you're like, wow, that's weird. Why did he turn him into stone? And it's not really explained, but you as the reader have to piece things together to try and determine why that occurred. Whereas in this book, we're just told a lot of the things. Now, that doesn't mean that's happening all the time, but it does happen quite a lot. For example, there's a part in the book, I can't remember who was talking at this part, but the character says, "We all had a shock when my sister conceived the second child only 5 years later, and the eldest won't even reach adulthood until he's 75. I thought that was a really interesting detail, the idea that fairies don't reach adulthood until they're 75, because of course they're immortal. And that was just told to us, and I just think that we could have been shown that a bit more. Maybe we see like a person who says they're 60 but actually they're an adolescent. Again, there's a part where Tamlin says, "These masks are a result of a surge of magic that occurred during a masquerade 49 years ago. Even now, we can't remove them." Great, that's a great piece of the world that we're learning about. But maybe could we have found that out in just a more interesting way than two characters just yapping to each other? Maybe. One of my favourite books is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and I love the way the world is revealed to us in that book. We don't really know what this world is. It's a world of these ancient halls, and then we find a crisp packet, and it's like, why is there the crisp packet there? The dichotomy of the ancient halls and the crisp packet is such an interesting visual. And yeah, I think that as a writer, creating a world, there's so many fun and interesting things you can do. And for me, I felt like those tools weren't utilised by the writer to the extent they could have been. One final part I want to talk about is the romance. So this book has fantasy elements, but it is a romance, I would say. I think maybe I like fantasy that has romantic elements, whereas this is a romance that has fantastical elements. Because the whole first part of the book is just Feyre and Tamlin and the relationship that they have being forged. And I don't read a lot of romance. I would say my favourite romance books are probably Sally Rooney's books, because I really love how genuine and real the romance feels. And that's because you understand that the characters have flaws and that they recognise each other's flaws, but they love them anyway. And I just felt like with Tamlin and Feyre, they're both of course flawed individuals, but maybe they didn't quite see the flaws in each other in the way that they should have to make the relationship feel more real. For example, Tamlin says at one point to Feyre, "You're perfect." And it's like, she's not perfect, dude. Like, she has a lot of issues going on. And also there's another part where Feyre says, "I was an unburdened piece of dandelion fluff, and he was the wind that stirred me about the world." Now that is lovely imagery, but I feel like in a relationship, you shouldn't feel like a bit of dandelion fluff, and your partner shouldn't feel like the wind. You should both feel like the wind. It should be equal. You shouldn't feel like you're just being controlled by the whims of the person that you're in love with. You pull yourself together. But people love the romance, like in A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I suppose people love the romance between Feyre and Rhysand more, and I can understand why they would. I didn't really buy the relationship with Tamlin and Feyre. And yeah, I think that's my issue. It just doesn't feel real. But then I think that that's the point of the book. It's not meant to be Sally Rooney. It's meant to be escapism. Okay, so there's my thoughts on Court of Thorns and Roses. I can see why people love this book, but I think like it's just not for me, and that's okay. And thank you very much for watching. If you've read this book, what did you think of it? And I'll see you in another video soon. Bye bye.